The Mercedes-Benz dealership gleamed under the afternoon sun, its glass facade reflecting the clear blue sky. Inside, the showroom floor sparkled with luxury vehicles that seemed to whisper promises of success and sophistication. Marcus Thompson straightened his tie as he walked through the automatic doors. At 34, he was one of the youngest partners at Henderson and Associates, a prestigious law firm downtown. Today was supposed to be a celebration. He'd just won a landmark case and decided to reward himself with the car he'd been eyeing for months, a sleek black Mercedes S-Class. The showroom was moderately busy. A few salespeople chatted with clients near the vehicles, their voices a low hum beneath the soft jazz playing through the speakers. Marcus approached the nearest desk, where a young salesman was typing on his computer. "Good afternoon," Marcus said with a warm smile. "I'm interested in looking at the S-Class models." The salesman, whose name tag read Derek, barely glanced up. "Those start at 90,000. Are you sure you're in the right place?" Marcus's smile faltered slightly, but he maintained his composure. "Yes, I'm quite sure. I've done my research and I'm ready to discuss financing options today." Derek finally looked up, his eyes traveling from Marcus's polished shoes to his tailored suit, lingering with obvious skepticism. "Look, man, those cars are serious money. Maybe you'd be more comfortable at the Honda dealership down the street?" Heat rose in Marcus's chest, but he kept his voice level. "I appreciate your concern, but I'd like to speak with someone about the S-Class. Preferably someone who's interested in making a sale today. Is there a problem here?" Both men turned to see a hulking figure approaching. Stan Morrison, the dealership's head of security, was a former police officer who'd been with the dealership for 5 years. His gray uniform stretched across his broad shoulders, and his hand rested casually on his belt near his radio. "No problem, Stan," Derek said quickly. "I was just explaining to this gentleman that our inventory might be out of his price range." Stan's eyes narrowed as he looked Marcus up and down. "You got business here?" "I do," Marcus replied, his lawyer instincts kicking in. He was acutely aware of how this situation could escalate. "I'm here to purchase a vehicle. I've been a customer of Mercedes-Benz for years. I currently drive an E-Class, and I'm looking to upgrade." Stan crossed his arms. "You got ID?" "Excuse me?" "I said, you got ID? We've had some incidents lately. Need to verify you're not trespassing." Marcus's jaw tightened. He glanced around the showroom. None of the other customers, all of whom were white, were being asked for identification. A well-dressed elderly couple was laughing with a saleswoman by a convertible. A young man in jeans and a t-shirt was sitting in an SUV, taking photos. "I'm a paying customer," Marcus said carefully. "I don't believe you have the right to demand my identification when I haven't committed any crime." "That's where you're wrong, buddy." Stan stepped closer, invading Marcus's personal space. "This is private property. I can ask anyone for ID. So unless you want trouble, I suggest you cooperate." The showroom had grown quieter. Other customers were watching now, some with concern, others with barely concealed curiosity. Marcus noticed the manager's office in the back, its door closed. "I'd like to speak with the general manager," Marcus said, pulling out his phone. "And I'm going to record this interaction for my own protection." Stan's face darkened. "Put that phone away. Now." "I have every legal right to," I said. "Put it away." Stan grabbed Marcus's wrist, his grip painfully tight. "You're coming with me. Get your hands off me." Marcus tried to pull away, but Stan was already forcing him toward the door. "This is assault. I'm an attorney, and you're making a huge mistake." "Sure you are, pal. And I'm the Pope." Stan laughed harshly. "I know your type. Coming in here trying to case the joint, looking for something to steal. Well, not on my watch." Derek and the other salespeople stood frozen, watching. Not one of them intervened. Marcus's legal mind was racing even as his body was being manhandled. He stopped resisting physically but continued speaking clearly. "My name is Marcus Thompson. I'm a partner at Henderson and Associates. I came here to purchase a vehicle, and I'm being forcibly removed without cause. I'm not resisting arrest. I'm complying under protest." "Save it for someone who cares," Stan muttered, shoving Marcus through the front doors. Outside, Marcus stumbled on the curb but caught himself. His wrist throbbed where Stan had gripped it, and his shoulder ached from being pushed. But more than the physical pain was the humiliation, the burning shame of being treated like a criminal in front of dozens of witnesses, simply for existing while black. Stan stood in the doorway, arms crossed. "Don't come back. Next time, I'll have you arrested for trespassing. You'll be hearing from my attorneys," Marcus said quietly. "Count on it." Yeah. Stan waved dismissively and disappeared back inside. Marcus sat in his car for several minutes, his hands shaking with anger and adrenaline. He'd faced racism before, subtle microaggressions, suspicious looks in stores, being followed by security in high-end shops. But this was different. This was blatant, public, and violent. He pulled out his phone and called his colleague, Sarah Chen, who specialized in civil rights cases. "Sarah, it's Marcus. I need your help. And I need you to record everything I'm about to tell you." The conference room at Henderson and Associates was filled with documents, video footage, and witness statements. Marcus sat at the head of the table, his wrist still slightly bruised. Across from him were Sarah and two other attorneys from the firm, James Henderson, the senior partner, and Alicia Rivera, who specialized in employment discrimination. "We've got them cold," Sarah said, sliding a tablet across the table showing security footage from the dealership. They were stupid enough to have cameras everywhere. You can clearly see the differential treatment, multiple white customers browsing without being questioned, you being confronted within minutes of arriving. James nodded grimly. "We've also got 3 witness statements. A customer who was there that day, a former employee who's been documenting discriminatory practices for months, and interestingly, Derek, the salesman. Apparently, he's had a crisis of conscience." Marcus looked up. "Derek is cooperating?" "Turns out he was told explicitly by management to discourage certain customers," Alicia explained. "He kept emails. In one, the sales manager literally wrote, 'Be selective about who you invest time with. You know the type we want here.'" "That's not even subtle," Marcus muttered. "No, it's not," James agreed. "We're building a case not just for your assault and false imprisonment, but for systematic discrimination. This dealership has a pattern. We've found 5 other incidents in the past 2 years, all involving black customers, all either ignored or dismissed by management." Sarah pulled up another document. Stan Morrison's history is interesting too. He was forced out of the police department after multiple excessive force complaints. All of them involved people of color. The dealership hired him anyway. Marcus felt the familiar burn of anger, but also something else, determination. "So what are we looking at?" "Multiple causes of action," Alicia said, counting on her fingers. "Assault and battery. False imprisonment. Intentional infliction of emotional distress. Violation of the state's Civil Rights Act prohibiting discrimination in public accommodations. And we can go after both Stan personally and the dealership under respondeat superior, employer liability." "What about punitive damages?" Marcus asked. James smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile. "Oh, we're definitely seeking punitives. The dealership's conduct was willful, wanton, and showed a reckless disregard for your rights. We want to make sure they feel this. And we're going public," Sarah added. "The media is all over this story. Local news wants to interview you. So does the NAACP. This is bigger than just your case, Marcus. This is about every black person who's been treated like a criminal for having the audacity to shop while black." Marcus was quiet for a moment, processing. Then he nodded. "Let's do it. All of it. But I want to be clear about something, this isn't just about me getting paid. I want real change. Mandatory training. Policy reforms. Independent oversight. I want to make sure this never happens to anyone else." "That's exactly what we're going to demand," James said. Stan Morrison looked uncomfortable in his suit. He sat across the conference table from Marcus and the legal team, his attorney, a nervous young man from the dealership's insurance company. Beside him, Sarah began the questioning. "Mr. Morrison, can you describe your training regarding when it's appropriate to ask customers for identification?" Stan shifted in his seat. We ask when we think it's necessary." "What makes it necessary?" "If someone looks suspicious." "And what makes someone look suspicious?" "You know, if they seem out of place." Sarah's voice remained perfectly neutral. Mr. Thompson was wearing a $3,000 suit. He drove a Mercedes E-Class to the dealership. He approached a salesman politely and asked about vehicles. "What about that seemed suspicious to you?" Stan's face reddened. I had a feeling. A feeling." Sarah made a note. "Mr. Morrison, on the day in question, you were working for approximately 6 hours. Is that correct?" "Yeah, sounds about right." "During those 6 hours, how many customers did you ask for identification?" "I don't remember exactly." "Let me help you remember." Sarah pulled up the security footage. "We've reviewed all the footage from that day. You asked exactly one person for ID. Mr. Thompson. Do you see any other customers being asked for identification in this footage?" Stan watched the video, his jaw tight. "No." "Mr. Morrison, what's the racial composition of the customers you see in this footage?" His attorney interjected. "I don't see how that's relevant." "It's extremely relevant to our discrimination claims," Sarah replied smoothly. "Mr. Morrison, please answer the question." Most of them are white." "Most?" Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Actually, all of them are white except for Mr. Thompson." "Isn't that correct?" "I guess so." "So the only black customer in the dealership that day was the only customer you demanded identification from, and ultimately the only customer you forcibly removed. Is that accurate?" Stan looked at his attorney, who nodded reluctantly. "Yeah. But it wasn't because, we'll get to your reasoning," Sarah interrupted. "First, let's talk about when you grabbed Mr. Thompson's wrist. He had not threatened you in any way, had he?" "No, but he had not touched you or anyone else?" "No." He had not stolen anything? Not that I saw, but, in fact, he had not committed any crime whatsoever, had he? Stan's silence was damning. Let the record reflect the witness has not answered, Sarah said. Mr. Morrison, you testified earlier that you were a police officer for 12 years before joining the dealership. Is that correct? Yes. You're familiar with the concept of reasonable suspicion? Of course. What reasonable suspicion did you have that Mr. Thompson was committing or about to commit a crime? Like I said, he seemed out of place. Because he's black. It wasn't a question. I didn't say that. Then what did you mean by out of place? Sarah leaned forward. He was appropriately dressed. He approached a salesman professionally. He stated clearly why he was there. What exactly was out of place about him, Mr. Morrison, other than the color of his skin? Stan's face was now bright red. I was doing my job. Your job is to profile customers based on their race? No. Let me show you something else. Sarah pulled up another document. This is an email from the dealership's sales manager, Richard Walsh. It was sent to all sales staff 2 months before the incident with Mr. Thompson. I'll read the relevant portion. Team, we need to be more selective about how we invest our time. Focus on qualified buyers who match our brand image. You all know what I mean. Mr. Morrison, you received a copy of this email. What did you understand match our brand image to mean? Stan's attorney jumped in. Objection. Speculation. I'm asking about his understanding, not making him speculate, Sarah countered, the attorney sighed. Go ahead and answer. Stan looked trapped. I guess it meant people who could afford the cars. Really? Sarah pulled up more documents. Because we have testimony from Derek Chen, the salesman who was present during the incident. He states that in sales meetings, management explicitly discussed the demographics we're targeting, and that during these discussions, they showed marketing materials featuring exclusively white, affluent customers. He also states that when he asked if the dealership welcomed all customers, Mr. Walsh told him, we welcome everyone, but some people just aren't Mercedes material. Do you recall hearing similar statements? Stan was silent. Mr. Morrison? I might have heard something like that. And you understood that to be code for racial profiling, didn't you? I understood it to mean we should focus on serious buyers. Yet Mr. Thompson was a serious buyer. He had excellent credit. He had the cash for a down payment. He was literally there to make a purchase that day. But you threw him out anyway. Why? The room was silent except for the sound of the court reporter's fingers on the keyboard. Finally, Stan spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. I made a mistake. Yes, Sarah agreed. You did. A mistake that cost Mr. Thompson his dignity, his sense of safety, and his trust in being treated fairly in public. A mistake that violated his civil rights. A mistake that your employer enabled through their discriminatory policies and practices. She closed her folder. No further questions. 8 months after the incident, the case went to trial. The courtroom was packed, not just with the parties and their attorneys, but with media, civil rights activists, and members of the community who'd heard about the case. Marcus sat at the plaintiff's table, calm and composed. Across the aisle, the dealership's attorneys shuffled papers nervously. Stan Morrison was there, looking miserable. So was Richard Walsh, the sales manager, and Paul Davidson, the general manager who'd been in his office during the entire incident and done nothing. The trial lasted 2 weeks. Sarah and her team presented the security footage, the emails, the witness testimony. Derek Chen took the stand and confirmed everything, explaining tearfully that he'd been taught to steer away certain customers. A former employee, a black salesman who'd been fired after 6 months, testified about the hostile environment. I was told I was a diversity hire, he said. And when I complained about customers using racial slurs, I was told I was being too sensitive. 2 weeks later, they found a reason to fire me. Expert witnesses testified about implicit bias, about the psychological harm of discrimination, about the economic impact of systematic exclusion. The dealership's defense was weak. They tried to argue that Stan was a rogue employee acting outside his authority. But Sarah demolished that argument by showing that management had received 3 previous complaints about Stan's conduct, all involving customers of color, and had done nothing. They tried to argue that Marcus hadn't suffered any real damages. Sarah called Marcus to the stand. Mr. Thompson, she said gently, can you describe how this incident has affected you? Marcus took a breath. I'm a successful attorney. I've worked incredibly hard to get where I am. I've faced obstacles my entire life because of my race, but I've persevered. I thought at this point in my life, I'd earned the right to be treated with basic dignity. He paused, his voice thick with emotion. After this happened, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying it in my mind. I felt humiliated. Angry. But more than that, I felt scared. Scared of what could have happened if Stan had been armed with more than just his fists. Scared of how easily my life could have been destroyed by someone who saw me as a threat simply because of how I look. I've been a Mercedes owner for 10 years. I've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars with that brand. And in a matter of minutes, I was treated like a criminal. Like I didn't belong. Like I was less than human. My son is 6 years old. How do I explain to him what happened? How do I tell him that no matter how hard he works, no matter how successful he becomes, there will always be people who see his skin color first and his humanity second? The courtroom was silent. That's what they took from me, Marcus continued. Not just the car I wanted to buy. Not just the time and stress of this legal battle. They took my sense of security. They took my belief that things were getting better. And they reminded me, in the most painful way possible, that I'm not seen as equal. Several jurors were crying. The defense attorney, to his credit, didn't try to cross-examine. There was nothing he could say. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the foreperson, a middle-aged white woman who'd been taking notes throughout the trial, stood to read the verdict. In the matter of Thompson versus Morrison and Prestige Mercedes-Benz, Marcus held his breath. On the count of assault and battery, we find in favor of the plaintiff. On the count of false imprisonment, we find in favor of the plaintiff. On the count of intentional infliction of emotional distress, we find in favor of the plaintiff. On the count of violation of civil rights, we find in favor of the plaintiff. The foreperson continued, her voice growing stronger. We award compensatory damages in the amount of $250,000. There was a murmur in the courtroom. And we award punitive damages in the amount of $2 million. The courtroom erupted. The judge banged his gavel, calling for order. Marcus felt Sarah squeeze his shoulder. He was too stunned to react. $2 million. The jury had sent a message, but the foreperson wasn't done. Additionally, we recommend that the court order the defendant dealership to implement comprehensive anti-discrimination training, to establish an independent oversight committee to review customer complaints, and to create clear policies prohibiting racial profiling. The judge nodded. The court accepts these recommendations and will issue an order accordingly. Furthermore, Mr. Morrison's actions were egregious enough that I'm referring this matter to the district attorney for potential criminal charges of assault and violation of civil rights. Stan Morrison's face went white. Marcus stood outside a different Mercedes-Benz dealership, this one 2 hours away. He'd received a personal call from the regional vice president, apologizing profusely and inviting him to visit any dealership in the region with a guarantee of exceptional service. He'd accepted. Not because he necessarily wanted another Mercedes, but because he wanted to prove a point. The general manager herself greeted him at the door. Mr. Thompson, it's an honor to have you here. I want you to know that your case has changed our entire company. We've implemented new training, new policies, and a zero-tolerance approach to discrimination. Marcus nodded. I appreciate that. But I need you to understand something. This shouldn't have taken a lawsuit. This shouldn't have taken me being assaulted and humiliated. This should have been standard practice from the beginning. You're absolutely right, she said quietly. And I'm sorry. We're sorry. We're trying to do better. Marcus ended up buying the S-Class he'd originally wanted. As he drove it off the lot, he felt a complex mix of emotions, satisfaction at his legal victory, sadness that it had been necessary, hope that maybe things really would change. His phone rang. It was Sarah. Have you seen the news? She asked. No, what's up? 3 other dealerships have been sued for similar discrimination. Our case set a precedent. People are fighting back. Marcus smiled. Good. Also, Stan Morrison pleaded guilty to assault charges. He got 6 months probation and a permanent ban from working in security. And the dealership? They're still paying out the judgment. But more importantly, they've hired a black woman as their new head of HR, specifically focused on diversity and inclusion. Real change, Marcus. You made real change happen. As Marcus drove home in his new car, he thought about his son. He thought about the world he'd inherit. It wasn't perfect. It probably never would be. But it was a little bit better than it had been before, and sometimes, that's what justice looks like, not a perfect solution, but a step forward. A refusal to accept the unacceptable. A willingness to fight, even when fighting is hard. Marcus Thompson had been thrown out of a dealership for being black, but he'd stood up, fought back, and won, and in doing so, he'd reminded the world that dignity isn't a privilege to be granted. It's a right to be respected.